Hey everybody, as promised yesterday, yes, I am going to talk today about the indivisibility of justice. Now, this is gonna be heavy, and people are gonna be tempted to twist my words, which will be incredibly ironic based on this idea. I started thinking about this because of the way people drop the term social justice now, the way rabbits shit in an attempt to sound smarter than thou. And social justice is a form of academic virtue signaling. I have a liberal arts degree. I got an edumacation. Therefore, I'm going to say social justice instead of the idea of just justice. Because, oh no, justice is a colonial construct that we have to work against because, you know, our Frankfurt School education gives us all these words that we don't quite know what they mean, but they sound good. Because this postmodern school of thought teaches that there's social justice, criminal justice, and economic justice. This is broad strokes. There's a whole bunch of other subsets. But that criminal justice is a form of social justice which is tied to economic justice. It's like the fucking Catholic Trinity, right? Oh, three, but one, but three, but they're separate entities, but they're the same thing. This is probably why Christianity never took with me. I like the Jewish idea, one God, one justice. The idea of God, quite frankly, in Jewish thought, isn't, they never describe God. God manifests as a bush. God manifests as tablets. God manifests as all this stuff. You know, they speak through other people, which Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman deal with brilliantly in Good Omens. But God, the idea of there being actual, tangible, right and wrong, that we can comprehend, understand, differentiate, and execute. That was the big world-changing idea of monotheism, is that systems, ethical systems, decision-making systems weren't just about outcomes. We want the crops to grow. We want the sun to shine. We don't want the river to flood. We don't want disease. You know, that was sort of that polytheistic precursor. Monotheism was, no. God is about right and wrong. And there's right and there's wrong. There's no, morality is complex in a lot of cases, which is why the Torah or the Old Testament for y'all contradicts itself in quite a few places because it's the stories of humanity. God intervenes very rarely, gives sort of, 8 simple rules for being my stiff-necked people. It was actually 613, but you get my drift. But then people applying this, it becomes very complicated. And this is why it's good to not complicate things more than we have to. The idea of social justice being some sort of separate and unique thing from criminal justice, though it's a subset and yada, yada, yada. It's actually kind of collectivist thinking that eliminates individuality in a really unhealthy way. The reason people separate social justice from criminal justice is social justice is, how to get the African American vote, as if all black people think the same. What's good for the big joke, and is it good for the Jews? Like that whole joke. It's a joke. And it's funny because, one thing you learn about Jewish families is disagreement runs rampant. You have to get very used to very vocal, vociferous disagreement. What's good? We don't know. But when you start treating people as cogs in a machine of class, well, it's easier to predict and control groups of people than it is individuals. And this is why you have to separate social justice from criminal justice, because criminal justice, by its very nature, are, well, supposed to be the facts of individual cases. But you cannot neatly separate criminal justice from social justice, because a law can be unjust. And that's why we can change the laws, right? If there's a law that is supposed to treat, the law is supposed to treat everyone fairly and equally under the law. Not every law does that. The shining historical example is crack cocaine having significantly longer prison sentences than powdered cocaine. There's no science behind it. The difference was crack was historically smoked more by African Americans. It was considered cheaper. Powdered cocaine was consumed, snorted by predominantly white people. And so you had that class demarcation. Crack was not necessarily more potent, as they claim. They couldn't prove that. It wasn't. But it wasn't a drug's a drug. There were much stiffer penalties associated with crack cocaine than powdered cocaine. That was not a just law. And when we start separating social justice and criminal justice, no, you can't. It's all just justice. Same with economic justice. If there are market systems that unfairly benefit one group of people over another group of people, that's not a just system. It's not fair. That's not even a free market. That's inherently protectionist. You cannot separate justice. You can separate truth from justice. You can separate fairness from justice, because sometimes justice is swift and people don't think it's terribly fair. Actually, I shouldn't say you separate fairness from justice, but it's like the wisdom of Solomon will cut the baby in half. Well, that's not just the baby didn't do anything. The wisdom of Solomon there is that he assumed that the true mother would not let her baby be cut in half, and that was why he determined, the real mother. But there's a reason, to quote comic books, Superman is for truth, justice, and I think they've dropped this, but the American way at the time. This was brilliant because one was an immigrant from Canada. I think, was Jerry Siegel from Canada? I think so. Or he's a Canadian citizen. But definitely children of immigrants, children of Jewish immigrants, acknowledge that truth, justice, and the American way are three different things. The American way is one form of enacting justice. It's imperfect. But at the time, that was sort of nationalism was seen as much healthier. The idea that used to be that America was an idea as much as a place. And so the American way was an example to the rest of the world where somebody from another place, among other things, could show up and through the sweat of their brow make good, as opposed to these other, older cultures where people were kept down by class or race or, religion, all that stuff. That stuff wasn't supposed to happen in America. And that was distinct from the bland idea of justice, because things like natural law theory believed that these demarcations within society were just, that nobles were just better than y'all, right? This is essential to understanding the whole idea of justice. And this is the problem. What is justice? What is it? Well, some people say it's fairness. It's equality. It's the ability to earn your way. Other people no, we should have a basic standard of living. Well, basic standard of living and being able to get fair compensation for your work are not in conflict, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness takes care of that very nicely. Life is separate from liberty, is separate from pursuit of happiness, and those happen in those in that order, the same reason the truth, justice, and the American way happen in that order, because you can't have justice without truth. You need to know the truth before you can make a just decision. And the American way is supposed to be based on justice. That's why it's in that order. Same thing with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, if you don't have your life, not much else matters, right? Kind of done there. You don't have to worry about anything else. Liberty makes life worth living. And liberty allows you to pursue happiness. It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But unless you hit the first two, life and liberty, you can't pursue happiness. And that pursuit of happiness, and this is the American way, by the way, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which indicates that America probably should be anti-death penalty and pro-marriage equality and things, you know. But they really focus on the life. But justice drives that idea. According to the American way, how do you know if something's just? Well, it protects life. Now, when does life begin? We're not going to go there, okay? In my faith, life begins at 8 days old. I'm not kidding. That's why you name a baby at 8 days, because Judaism comes from a time when infant mortality was high. These were not questions religion was designed to solve. When does life begin? I don't know. 8 days old. There, go away. It was arbitrary, okay? 8 days. There's nothing terribly sacred about 8 days. It's not based on science. We have to make a judgment call. But, you know, okay, justice, life, okay? That's why a lot of people consider the death penalty to be unjust. You shouldn't eye for an eye kind of thing. But life, liberty, maximum liberty. And this is where the social justice movement starts to have trouble, right? Because they tend to treat people like classes. If there's a right way and a wrong way to, for instance, be a woman, huge group of people. There's a right or wrong way to be gay. There's a right or wrong way to be black. This not black enough argument that won't go away. If there's a right or wrong way to be these things, these are not things you do. These are things you are. Okay? That's not liberty. And that was the part of the American way that was distinct from other things. There's no know your lot in life, know your place, know your caste. No, sky's the limit. Liberty. If there's, you know, right or wrong ways to be black, right or wrong ways to be white, right or wrong ways to be gay or straight or a woman or a man or transgender, there's right or wrong ways to do that. You are not an individual. You are a cog in a machine. And this is where the Marxist underpinnings of social justice start to rear their ugly head. Because justice connects with liberty in a very real way. Because why do you put someone in jail? You take away their liberty as a punishment. Because the people that came up with the idea of a punitive incarceration knew that people naturally strive for freedom. It's hardwired into our brains. So if you're subscribing to a worldview that keeps you in a self-imposed jail of rigid behavioral controls, you are not free. And that's a lot of social justice: controlling language, controlling movement, controlling freedom of association, no platforming, all this stuff. And they argue that this is a unique form of justice because it doesn't pass the litmus test of true justice. Because true justice is that, yes, there are consequences to association in terms of the way people think of you. But people shouldn't be rigidly restricted from even talking to someone with views that differ from their own. This is how you learn. Remember what I said, that avoiding mistakes is not learning? Making mistakes allows you to learn. This is the problem. You can't even think about freedom if you're hardcore into social justice because you're already in a cage. Your behavior is so restricted based on these rules that you don't make your own choices anymore. And then there's the pursuit of happiness. Well, how can you be happy if you have no choices? Aha! The argument shared by natural law theory and Marxist philosophy is that collectives of people dictate that people are happier when they have fewer choices because it's easier. Engels jumped through hoops to try to prove to the working class women and the noble classes of, among other places, Britain, that they had some kind of common cause when they absolutely didn't. The noble women wanted voting rights for women because their husbands could vote. Working class women didn't give a shit about women's suffrage because their husbands couldn't vote. They didn't they didn't meet the land ownership requirements. Yeah, that was one of the big challenges of first wave feminism in England. So Engels created this manufactured class, women, because it upped his numbers. It's like all activism is all about a numbers game, and that's the problem. True justice is individualized justice. And when we actually break down the American way definition of justice that we've all internalized at this point around the world, at this point, the American idea of justice has won the battle of ideas. We are prepared to have a certain amount of chaos to ensure maximum freedom. You're seeing people around the world that don't live under these sorts of systems, fight to get the freedoms that we in North America and parts of Europe that adapted this system more. I mean, the idea of representative democracy, things like that, they all came out of this like American thought soup. I wonder what thought soup would taste like. Brains. But and there's a reason governments like the Russian government and the Chinese government, these Marxist systems, are using, psychological warfare and cyber warfare to make America look bad, to show the flaws in the American system, because they can't win in a fair battle of ideas. They have to use dishonest propaganda to undermine people's faith in the American way. Because the American way, imperfect as it is closest to a pure indivisible form of justice there is. Now, there's a lot of work to do. We got to get the racism out of the criminal justice system. It's funny because when I was coming up, we didn't even call it the criminal justice system. We called it the legal system because everybody sort of nodded it. It wasn't just. There were a lot of problems with it, but it was the best we got. Grade 12 law professor who was, she was like a female Severus Snape, man. But she kept saying it's not the justice system, it's the legal system. Because she came from a family law background, and I think that's why she was so bitter. Same woman who accused me of Gestapo tactics in class. Yep, loaded there. But my friend who's gay and black after the class, he just broke out laughing. And he said, I know, what was that? She just hates you. Interesting that my first one of my formative experiences with injustice came at the hands of a woman who had a background in law, who did not believe that the criminal justice system was just, to the point that she called it the legal system. But this is the problem with separating social justice from criminal justice to economic justice. It gives economic systems and criminal systems a pass to not be just. If a law isn't just, it's not just. There aren't different kinds of justice. There's one kind of justice, equality and fairness for all, right? And that means if you do an equal crime, you are punished equally. Now, the idea of social justice is supposed to be to keep people out of that system of criminal justice by giving them more choices. And we're back to choice, right? The lack of success. I mean, if you look at the gay rights movement has had phenomenal success. The gay rights movement has surpassed civil rights, racial civil rights, the women's movement, just leapfrogged over both those movements that got started much, much earlier. And there are a bunch of reasons for that we don't have time to get into now. But the gay rights movement has been an undeniable success story. But a lot of that gay rights movement was hinged on economic and social privilege. In other words, there are rich gay people in the media that could create an LGBTQ plus positive narrative. Right now, it's happening with trans rights right now. Don't be surprised if trans rights also gets a lot of rapid change very quickly. Civil rights we're still lagging behind on racially. Why? There are fewer people of color in decision-making processes higher up. There's a reason everybody praises Jay-Z as a business leader, as somebody they listen to, is he a black billionaire now? He's up there. There's a reason this stuff matters. Because when you're in those echelons, then all of a sudden, you get to influence things behind the scenes. You get to be the decision makers instead of just the face of a product. And because there were a lot of closeted gay guys, closeted gay women, in those positions of power already, we got stratospheric movement on that. Civil rights movement is trickier because people just aren't at the table. I mean, pundits like Al Sharpton, entertainers like Jay-Z, who control their own money and make their own music and produce other people's music. People like Barack and Michelle Obama. This is all within our lifetime. We need more of that, of all races, because if we don't have those power players, change doesn't happen and change doesn't stick. And that's the economic pillar. So let's stop talking about social justice and criminal justice and economic justice. Because if we're doing it right, they're all the same thing, right? This idea that justice is this colonial construct and we shouldn't be using it because it's a white man's idea of justice. No. That's being at the table and then walking away from the table saying, I don't like your table. Too bad. There's one table where decisions get made. You can't just go, oh no, that's a colonial construct. I'm not going to partake in it. First of all, the idea of justice has been examined long before colonialism. We're going back to before the Greeks. I mean, hey, the Hebrews, right? The Hebrews were the ones that started kind of thinking about this idea. That's not colonial structures, okay? That's even before the age of empire with the Romans and the Greeks. The idea of justice, the exploration of justice, is not a colonial concept. It may have gotten bastardized by colonial concepts. But we have to stop encouraging people with less power to walk away from the table. Because unless you're at the table, unless you're in the room where it happens, to quote the Hamiltonian cliche, you don't get to make the decisions. And I really think that these collectivist separations of justice, separating economic and criminal justice, which, let's face it, are the two levers in our society that actually enforce justice and pick winners and losers. You separate that from social justice because social justice is way easier to collectivize. You are disenfranchising. You are further marginalizing the people who need your help the most because you are trying to subsume them into a collective instead of maintaining and championing and elevating their individuality. And you don't have justice. You don't have equality. You don't have actualization, self-actualization, unless you are an individual. That is the mark of all those things. So this was really heady. I know, complicated, but if you like this content, because I guarantee you it's not dunking on somebody or talking about a video game or something like that. It will not do as well as on YouTube, but we have to talk about this stuff. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching!